In case you haven't noticed, the current theme of this channel is fourth and as of now final entries in racing game franchises that are either overrated or don't get the love they deserve. We started off strong by calling
Carnival of Pain
for the disaster fuck it is, and last time we took a rose-tinted look at a classic from the early days of the 7th generation of consoles. One that still holds up and, in my opinion, remains seriously underappreciated. That we sort of took a few cheap shots at Codemasters while we were at it. Now, I was originally going to do a larger rant about the number 4 and the connotations it has to video games, but then I discovered that this cow had one more udder that I hadn't milked yet. Which is why today, we're going to talk about a franchise that started out dominating in the early days of the 7th console generation, before stagnating, fading, and ultimately bottoming out in an entry that perfectly demonstrates how bland, uninspired, and frankly fucked the racing game genre and discourse surrounding it is, when this is called one of the best racers of the generation. So sit back, buckle up, and make sure to connect your drinks bottle as we take a leisurely stroll down the grid. Saying that the first Grid title, which launched in 2008 for all then relevant platforms, was the first of a new franchise is a long story. But to put it short, it was sold in some territories with the old race driver name, which in and of itself had sprung from the Toka Touring Cars games. Much like how every time Naughty Dog did a 4th game in a series it had to be a kart racer, or at least that was the case until 2016. I mean, for fuck's sake, nail the drugs, man. The name Unkarted was right there. The franchise has all the exotic locations needed to provide spectacular race tracks. There's plenty of treasure that could be used for collectibles and all the guns you could ever want to strap onto a racer. It seems like every 4th entry in this series had to shake up the formula and only use the previous title as a tribute. And honestly, in the case of Grid, focusing differently might have been the only good option. Toka Race Driver 3 was packed with different race types. Grid has a more modest number. But as they say, it's about quality rather than quantity. There's a bit of foreshadowing for you there. The fun begins already when you're setting up your profile. While the earlier Race Driver games already went the extra step and actually made the name of your save file the name of your player character, it didn't really go much further than that. Here, you get to also pick a radio name that the crew chief will address you by. That's right, there's voice lines for all of these names, and if your real name isn't among them, you can always pick from a decent selection of nicknames that are either taken from or sound like Top Gun rejects. Also,
Carnival of Pain.
if you're looking, here's a better way to do an in-media res opening than the shit you did. And so begins probably the most iconic starting segment to any racing game ever, driving a Dodge Viper around the streets of San Francisco. What's there to say? This is a quick one-lap sprint where all you need to do is reach the finish line. But of course we all like to start out strong by winning this race, don't we? From there, the game slowly but steadily introduces you to more and more of the behind-the-scenes stuff that makes this game the masterpiece it is. First on the list, you have to earn money to buy a Mustang you can use to crash into crowds at top speed. You do this by driving for other teams, introducing the driver offers mechanic. While these are introduced as a legitimate alternative to racing for your own teams, they aren't. They do, however, work excellently as a quick taster of the many different vehicle types on display. Once you've won a few of these driver offers, you're basically let free, starting by doing some basic setting up of your team, including providing a team name and livery. Starting from here, you're into the main gameplay loop. Win races to impress sponsors so you can get more money you can use to buy more cars in which to win more races. It's a simple loop, but it works. That's actually a pretty good way to summarize the experience of playing Grid. There's a lot of, in hindsight, really simple ideas that just mesh together so damn well. Why wouldn't you want to control who's your teammate in a racing game? Why don't you get to pick your own colors and sponsors? Why make cheats in racing games so boring when you can have... It's just 1 or 2 steps shy of being more sandbox than racing game, and even when it is a racing game, look at the selection of events on offer. Do you drive highly serious open-wheel racers in Europe or crashy smashy bashy in America? Tuner cars down a mountain in Japan at midnight or Koenigsegg's in San Francisco? John Tanner can kiss my ass. And once you've mastered them all by kicking Raven West's butt in all of them, the game really opens itself up to interpretation, and, most importantly, shenanigans. Oh yeah, Raven West, the best team in the world. Without a doubt the most infamous team in racing game history. Like the Mercedes F1 team, but across basically all championships on all continents. Whose 2 drivers are references to the early Otaka race driver games, what with Rick the Scot and Nathan I have the same surname as the protagonist from Race Driver 1, McCain. I believe there are 2 kinds of people in this world. The people who think Grid 2008 is a masterpiece, and those who make a living as a human doorbell. Considering how Grid 2008 is basically universally acclaimed, it's amazing that Grid 2 wouldn't be a thing until 2013. And, oh boy, is this a divisive one. Starting off with the cover of the game, you can't tell me those cars aren't supposed to make it look like you'll be facing off against Raven West again. Spoiler alert, you won't. In terms of gameplay, however, at first glance it's hard to see what people are on about. Sure, the 24 Hours of Le Mans is missing, but it's still a smorgasbord of basically all kinds of motorsport. It's not what people have a problem with, however. They have a problem with the handling model. Quick interlude here, because this is now 2013, 3 years after Criterion reinvented the classic arcade racer with the Hot Pursuit reboot, and 2 years after Ubisoft Reflections reinvented 1970s car chase movies with appropriately slidey physics with Driver San Francisco. The first Grid was already a bit on the drifty side, but it got even more so with Grid 2. Personally, I don't really have a problem with this. I have more of a problem with them removing everything that made the original Grid great and replacing those systems with half-baked counterparts. Cars and sponsors, for instance. You're no longer paying for your cars, but rather unlocking them through challenges, which isn't inherently bad. Which means sponsors are relegated to increasing your fan count, which is basically irrelevant. Oh, and they also decided to remove the cockpit camera, which has since become a recurring joke that Codemasters thinks is very funny. Speaking of removing all the things that make Grid Grid, pretty much spot on a year after Grid 2 wasn't all that well received, Grid Autosport was squirted onto the market. It's basically Grid 2, but with extreme traction control, a career mode they couldn't be bothered to make in any way interesting, to the point where you don't even get to choose your own racing colors anymore, so what the fuck? And littered with DLC that you can't buy on Steam anymore. The only reason I can possibly see why anyone would prefer this game to any of the other titles is that it at least has lots of content. Pretty much everything from both the previous games return, cars, tracks, and even then I'd only recommend buying this game if you're absolutely out of other games to play. Which all leads us nicely on to Grid 2019. Remember how I said Autosport's redeeming feature was the sheer amount of content? Yeah, 2019 doesn't have that. And I honestly have nothing more to say. The base game is irredeemably short on things to do. The career mode is somehow even blander than it was in Autosport, and I'm sorry, but a man who can't decide if he's retired from F1 or not can't save it. I can totally imagine that 2019 was the result of Codemasters doing a port of Autosport, realizing they'd let most of the licenses in that game run out because they were actually carried over from Grid 2, and decided to throw something together at the last minute. You wanna know why this is particularly frustrating? Because there is one Codemasters published title from the last couple of years that does feel like a Grid game. You wanna know what that is? Project Cars 3. Now hear me out before you bring out your pitchforks. You buy the cars, you customize the livery with paints and sponsors, you earn sponsor money to buy more cars and enter more events. This is the most Grid game we've had in 10 years. Fight me, GT Planet. I dare you. Oh yeah, that award thing I introduced last month. where I honor utter incompetence and complete adherence to neo-capitalism. How could I forget about that? Honestly, I'm in two camps as to who to award this to. On one hand, Activision deserves it because they're shitheads and just greenlit buttplug cuntflap getting a further $155 million in bonuses. Remember that thing I said about him taking a pay cut to his non-bonus money to appease the investment firms that says he's earning too much, even for them? Yeah, this just further offsets that. On the other hand, however, in honor of Pride Month, there's this little nugget from Disney. First of all, which one of these characters is supposed to be representation? Goofy? One who doesn't have a love interest? And why is it that the Disney cartoons have this idea that they need to uphold some sort of special purity by not having the ducks and the mice intermingle with each other? What's that all about? What are you trying to say here, Disney? All of this is, of course, further compounded by this tweet from Alex Hirsch. I really don't know who's the bigger shithead this month. It's so hard to have to just give out what... Hold on a minute, I make the rules here. Pride Month is about being as inclusive as possible, and excluding either of these throbbing veiny dildos doesn't sound very inclusive to me. So know what? In the spirit of equal fuckage, they both get a piss-colored drilldozer. And Alex Hirsch, if you find your way to this video, send me your address and there'll be a box of chocolates heading your way for the Good Fucking Human Being Award. So I've received this comment on my Test Drive Unlimited 3 reaction video. Biggest game Big Ben and Nikon has ever made? Oh yeah, because not unlike my videos, their smaller games are just oozing with competence. Bigger than TDU2's map? What, the map that might as well have come from a Ubisoft game considering how devoid of anything it is? Am I the only one seeing this? If that post is any indication of what being a neurotypical is like, then I praise all the gods that I've got Asperger's.